You said it don't matter. Have you ever had the desire to do something so fulfilling that money didn't matter? I have. Have you ever had the thought that you were created to do something greater than what you were in life or where you were at in life, like the station you were at in life? I have. Have you ever thought about being able to do something day to day where money wasn't a requirement? I have. That's one of the reasons why I think and believe that therapeutic communities save lives. I also realize by looking at your faces that you have thought of multiple scenarios where you can express to me things that you can relate to. That's why it's so important to realize that Delaware is considered, when you talk about therapeutic communities, as the model internationally of what to create a TC to be. Moreover, Delaware has gotten to a place where people have become so accustomed with tearing down what once worked for the purpose of meeting demands of stakeholders that don't really understand what goes on in these processes. Again, I say that's one of the reasons why I believe that therapeutic communities save lives. This process actually started in 1998, July. It was summer. What happened was a group of DOC personnel began to identify that residents that were coming through the Department of Corrections were coming in with drug-related charges, meaning that they were getting severe sentences, but they weren't getting the issues that led to them committing the crimes addressed. So what they did was a group of people came together and they developed a therapeutic community model based off what they've seen done in other facilities throughout the United States. They modeled the Model Key after a program that started in Synanon, Texas. The program was called Synanon. It started in the state of Texas. As the program began to develop, realized the first thing they had to do was identify the type of offender that they would bring into that process. Of course, the offender was an offender that committed an offense, but more importantly, was an offender that had been identified through the assessment process in the Department of Corrections as having a substance abuse issue. So the first process for the key that was developed was more about addressing a person's behavior rather than worrying about their emotions. So the focus of the whole program was to address the behavior norms that were created from people using drugs and abusing them and becoming dependent. It focused nothing on whether or not the person that was being addressed for behavior got emotional, decided to quit. It actually was driven off of just what was best in terms of addressing behavior. Eventually what happened is they started to bring offenders in that had lengthy sentences. So now you're intermingling guys, let's say, that are at minimal just locked up for purchasing a small amount of drugs. So as they purchased a small amount, you have a guy that possibly went to a corner, purchased a bag of heroin. He's locked up with a guy that's been in jail for 20 years that killed somebody and used drugs. The issue that created is you're dealing with two different demographics now. So the guy that's been in jail for 20 years, his behavior norms are different versus the guy that's been home within the last 6 months and now is locked up in the same program. So what happened is they had to bring in a consultant. The consultant they brought in was Dr. Hooper. Dr. Hooper took and meshed traditional behavioral therapy with rational emotive behavioral therapy. So he basically took behavioral treatment, which is basically them receiving accountability, them getting addressed for their behavioral norms by doing things like if you're a drug dealer, for example, they may make a car out of paper to symbolize the car that you idolized when you were in the streets, but to devalue it, they make it out of cardboard. So they used to use image breakers and things like that to de-emphasize the importance that a drug dealer would put on something materialistic. Whereas a person that used drugs, they may have him in a position of authority where he's actually addressing a guy that may have sold him drugs in the street for the purpose of building his self-esteem. So as this model plays out, they bring in a consultant and he's basically looking at the model as it develops, and over the course of time, the people that were relapsing after graduation, it started to decrease. Now you have guys that have did 20-year sentences that are going in the community and being productive citizens. There was an issue with that, though. There was no way to prove it. So around 1995, the Department of Corrections recruited the University of Delaware and a lead researcher by the name of Dr. Inciardi. Dr. Inciardi basically did a case study where he studied what's called the Key-Crest Aftercare Continuum. Key is basically they do a therapeutic community in an institutional setting, meaning a traditional jail. They're typically in that process for 24 months. They reduced that time and cut it in half and introduced doing Key for 12 months, Crest Aftercare, which was born from them needing services to transition them from being in a completely institutional setting to being in a work release setting where they're actually returning to the community day to day, coming back to the institution at night and receiving services similar to what they received in jail, but less restrictive because now they're receiving the external stimuli of being in the streets. Now they're coming back in, still interacting with staff. So now they realize there's another issue. Now you have Key, you have Crest, but there is no support services after Crest. This is when they developed aftercare. Dr. Inciardi and the researchers that basically did the case study found an analysis, and the analysis basically found that when a person does Key and completes it, does Crest and successfully completes it, and gets in aftercare and stays engaged for 6 months, that the recidivism rate drops by 75%. Literally, you're talking about 3 out of every 4 residents that come through this program are successful after they get out. All of this is of grave importance because something significant happened. At some point, as anyone that has success in any process, the process became so big, it became so internationally known, they thought that the process was bigger than the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper would be Dr. Hooper. He was let go. They literally let Dr. Hooper go. They thought that they could run this continuum without the guy that was the founding father. Then another significant issue happened. In this field, you have what's called a hostile takeover. What that means is a company gets brought out by another company. Of course, when a company gets brought out, and I know you're thinking about this, the first thing they go to is cost-cutting strategies. So they decided to do traditional turnover. So anyone that was considered an alumnus, which is a key element to how Dr. Hooper ran this process, they got rid of all of the men and women that had basically completed Key, Crest, Aftercare and were alumnus working within this continuum now. They're actually home and have been rehired to come back in and basically work with offenders to transition them through the same process that they went through. This is so significant because now you're losing the element of realism that makes the residents connect and buy in that have fears, anxieties, and issues that we can't even identify because we're book educated versus having life experience. Notice I began to use the word we because I'm talking to all practitioners of which I belong. That's why I know this topic is so powerful because as practitioners, our deepest desire is to help those that desire to help themselves. So what happens next is another significant thing. The population goes through an explosion. Now we have what's called co-occurring offenders beginning to grow in terms of numbers in the process. A co-occurring offender would be identified as a person that has a substance abuse issue associated with a mental health disturbance. It could be anything from ADHD and them smoking marijuana and basically develop dependence on the marijuana, and as they withdraw, they have problems with memory. They have problems with hyperactivity. Those just 2 small things, would that not make it difficult for a resident to sit through a program and listen to information that's supposed to educate them? Losing Dr. Hooper removed that element because there was no one to translate book knowledge, real life experience, and what was happening day to day in the program. And now you've gotten rid of all the alumnus. They're all gone. So now all you have is people that have been traditionally trained in this field. Again, I say treatment saves lives. Now we come to like the crux of why Delaware is so powerful, or why it's losing its power a day at a time. And I know that's bringing you to the point where you're thinking to yourself, what could that possibly be? Quite simply, we've become so comfortable dismissing what worked in the past because we've fallen in love with what they say do in the present. So now you come to 2005. We've lost Dr. Hooper. A study's been done to prove that this works. We basically have all the mechanisms we think in place to make this an effective process. But again, it's 2005. This process started in 1988. But in 2005, what made it work in 1998, we no longer respect it as the building block that it is. Now, community as a method doesn't work anymore because all the tangible ingredients are gone. You got rid of the only gatekeeper that really worked. So at some point, DOC admits to itself, we've made a mistake. We let go of maybe the only guy that was possible of holding the reins. Now DOC, holding its own self accountable, begins to look within the ranks of the contractors that they have, and from those ranks, they think they find a guy that's capable. Because he's just viewed as a guy because he doesn't have, from their standards, any management experience. He's never ran any of these components, but they see something within this guy. That individual is Aaron Prince. Lengthy history in this field, never had any noticeable success in this continuum, key, crest, aftercare. They promote him from a supervisor, which is significant, to a director's position with no prior management experience in this field. Within a short period of time, himself, Cornell Brunson, and Tony House take what's known as the crest aftercare continuum and flip the whole program over. Aaron, having foresight, forecasted what he would need prior to taking the job. He asked for a specific alumnus to help him rebuild what he thinks has been torn down within that process. Aaron actually admits to himself before getting the job that he isn't as knowledgeable as this process as he needs to be, and he begins to basically foster an environment for this alumnus to come in and play a more significant role than he even realizes at the moment. So what goes on is Aaron and this alumnus create two components that are from old school behavioral modification treatment. And listen, it's important to realize why DOC took behavioral modification away. Because residents at some point were being abused in that process. There was physical harm being caused. People with mental health issues weren't being identified. And looking at your faces, I can tell the degree of depth and pain one experiences when we realize we fall short as practitioners. And that's what DOC began to realize. We're not putting the client first. That same pain was echoed in DOC's taking ownership and final decision to hire Aaron Prince. So as Aaron Prince comes in, the alumnus teaches him two components he wasn't aware of that nobody realizes were the key to what Dr. Hooper did. One of the components of community as a method, and community as a method is really about the staff, the resident community, the community at large, administrators, the Department of Corrections, and legislators all coming on the same page and doing what is best by putting the client first. That means that if your job says that you're not supposed to pick up the phone and call someplace because a resident needs housing, then you're literally maintaining the law, but you're violating a human principle. What I mean by that is sometimes putting a man or a woman first means that you have to take the risk of making the right choice, even if on paper it's wrong. So Aaron started practicing all of this. So this component of healthy fear developed. This is what the alumnus actually taught Aaron Prince. The reason why treatment doesn't work for your mod or your module or for any of the people that have tried it following him, meaning Dr. Hooper, is because nobody realized the practitioner isn't the one that makes the therapeutic community run. It's the residents. In order to make a TC function well, you have to have the ability to empower residents to empower one another. It's not the staff holding the residents accountable, it's the resident. Now, if you really think about that, that makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense because residents will see each other in the community. They won't see us. So the power of them coming together is so transformative because a guy will say in honesty, hey, you may be hurting yourself continuing to do the stuff that you think you're getting away with. So what Aaron basically did, he merged the style he had, he merged the style the alumnus had, and they fostered an environment where healthy fear and other transformative properties took the forefront. They literally created scenarios for residents where it challenged them in such a way where they had to start working through their fears, where they had to start working through their anxiety, where they had to learn how to love themselves in a way to where they never gave up on themselves regardless of the challenge that was in front of them. This is also powerful because as a practitioner, you realize every day when you go home, nobody understands what you do. Nobody understands. And when you try to articulate to somebody in language that makes sense to them outside of this field, you make no sense at all. And the key to this whole thing is, as you begin to try to articulate the love that you have for guiding someone through the process of changing their lives, you become impacted because you realize a legislator from Dover has actually changed what works in his field because they haven't come in and witnessed what you do day to day. Again, I say, therapeutic communities save lives. They save lives when we take the stance that people that are unaware of what we do in here every day need to be made aware by us continuing to do the right thing, because if you don't believe in the reality that therapeutic community saves lives, and you know what, this brings a story to mind for me. And the story is, realize that the man and woman that we give up on may be the man or woman that moves next door to us and harms one of the people that we love. Also realize the man or woman that we save through the methods that we practice may be the man or woman that saves our mother on the side of the road. It may be the man or woman that runs into a burning building and helps a family stranded in a major disaster. So I think I've tried to share with you a couple principles about therapeutic communities, and you should walk away from this informed. But I want you to realize the power of changing a human life is your ability to believe it works if you work it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moreover, I think it's important to attest to the fact that this process is so powerful by admitting one truth. And the truth is, I know this process worked because I'm the alumnus that they recruited to help make this work. And I'm now an ex-offender that runs a program nobody thought an inmate could ever run.